Hi, I'm Jim Zub. I'm a professional comic book writer, and this is another question and answer session where I take questions from my patrons, people who are supporting me on Patreon, and answer them here in a video. I used to answer questions just on text, but I think that the video format here is a little bit more interactive. You get to see me, I get to be a bit more spontaneous, and I can go a bit more in depth on my answers. So these two questions on this time are from Jasper Borgman. His first one is, do you write every issue for a reader who has not read the previous issues? I believe that was something Jim Shooter insisted stories should have. So I do hew pretty close to that concept. The format that we're in now, although comics are still being released monthly, the long tail version of these stories is going to be collected in trade paperback. And that was not the norm in Jim Shooter's time. Jim Shooter, just to catch everyone up if you're not aware, he was the editor-in-chief at Marvel, I believe from the late 70s through to the late 80s. It was a golden period in terms of sales for the company and the era I grew up, reading Marvel comics first in. And he had a lot of pretty strict edicts in terms of how comics should be done. And I think there is some logic to that. Absolutely. You never know when someone is going to come in on a storyline, and it can be helpful to keep people, aware of who these characters are, where they are, and what is at stake. I think that's just good storytelling in general. But the specific kind of tools that were used in a lot of those early 80s comics, where characters are using their powers, talking about what their superpowers are, how their relationships are with each other, and things like that. It worked a lot better when you were only reading the book once a month. So it's like a quick check-in, or for a new reader, a way to get them up to speed. But when you read these in collection, it can feel a little bit kind of weird, like characters are constantly talking about themselves every 20 pages, or reminding everyone, hey, so-and-so is in a relationship with me, or this is, my weakness, or things like that. I think it's valuable to have those kinds of little storytelling elements, reintroduced and reminded, but we've got to be a bit more subtle about it in modern comic storytelling, just because of the collected edition format is now, it's the norm. It's what most people are going to be, over the long haul, the way that they're going to be reading the stories. And so you need to be cognizant of the fact that each chapter has to exist on its own as a storytelling unit, but also be, aware that this is going to be collected as a book at the same time. What I do make sure of is that in every issue, characters are, calling each other by name or by code name where needed, that their powers are being utilized, even if I'm not going through every last little detail of it. For the superhero comics in particular, I'll make sure that characters do, something that they're known for, or there's some example of their personality and their capabilities as much as possible. I try not to cram that in there. Like, I don't want characters just doing stuff literally to take up page real estate, but I do want to set that tone and make sure it's really clear. If it's the first issue of a story arc in particular, I'm extra careful about introducing all those elements and making sure that the reader is well aware of who these characters are, what is at stake, and everything else. And then the middle chapters, it's obviously more difficult to do that, but I still try and introduce those things in there. It's a long rambling kind of way of saying that I definitely consider some of those Shooter-isms as I work away on the issues, but I definitely don't hold to it as tightly as they did in the 80s, because we're not in that format anymore. People have a lot more access to earlier issues, whether it's digital, whether it's comic book shops, and just the trade paperback programs and collections. People have a lot more, readers have a lot more ability to go back and grab the first part of a story. They have a lot more flexibility to be able to jump in and then move backwards and grab back issues in a way that they just didn't before. And so I try and make sure my stories are as clear as possible, but I'm not held to this absolute kind of formula. All right. For Jasper's second question, what do you believe the best way is to begin the first page of an issue? And then he's got sort of three different options. A, straight into the action or tension. B, a layout of the characters, who, what, where, and why. Or C, some other option of my choice. I think it's a bad idea to try and find an absolute formula. As structured a writer as I am, and I am a lot more structured than a bunch of other comic book writers that I know, I think there is no absolute perfect answer. I think it depends on the kind of story you want to tell. I think the way you open the issue sets an expectation for the reader. So if you open with, really tight close-ups and a series of panels, and then blow out to a full page or a 2-page spread, that has a very different kind of feel to the opening. We've got those tight little close-ups and then boom, something huge. Sometimes you open big. Sometimes you open really quiet and graceful and build up tension as you go. I think the more you try and staple these stories down and you say, you must always do this, you are limiting yourself in terms of possibilities. So do you want to have a high action opening? Do you want to have energy? Do you want it to feel big and bombastic right from the first page? In a lot of action adventure stories, the answer is yes. So more often than not, I will open big. I will open in the midst of tension, or I will open with a big moment, because that's kind of what readers expect from action adventure. Even still, you've got to keep in mind that if you do the same thing over and over again, the exact same way, no matter how exciting it is, it's going to lose its effect. So throttling your pacing, throttling your storytelling, changing up the way that you open issues, the way you close issues, the way you use, the page and the panel, that contrast is just as important as finding methods that work. And so what I would say to you is, none of the above. It's like the C answer or the D answer would be none of the above, or all of the above. You're using what feels right for this particular story. You're, twisting the dial in different directions and trying different pacing to achieve different effects, depending on what story you're going to tell, particularly on an ongoing series where, the reader is following you along issue after issue. And that means that they're going to see your patterns. And the minute that they see those patterns and they feel bored by them, you're losing them in terms of entertainment. So, a mysterious opening one issue, and then another issue, I might have a big bombastic kind of action. One issue I open with a splash, another issue I might open with a series of tight little close-ups, or what feels like an unrelated scene that will then come back in the end in some exciting fashion. All of these tools are at our disposal, and all of them should be considered, usable. So don't look for absolute answers. There are methods that work. There are ways that, can clearly tell the story, and you should use as many of them as possible. But don't try and staple yourself down to, on page 1, you must always, on page 3, there must be. That kind of cold, hard, mechanical process is just going to squeeze the life out of your stories. The more you make, the more creative, and the more confidence you'll have to be creative about making these choices and opening in exciting fashion, closing stories with confidence, and bringing readers on a cool ride. And that's really our goal, is to communicate and to entertain. So Jasper and everyone else, I hope you found these answers useful on your own comic creating journey. If you like what you see here and you're interested in more of the comic creation process, I have over 40 different articles on my website, jimzub.com, that you can check out at any point. I go through how to pitch stories, how to break into the industry, how to find artists, and some of the economics of creator-owned comics. If you want to dive even deeper than that, on my Patreon page, for the price of a coffee, you can go through over 250 scripts and pitches that I've put together over the years. Compare that written version to the published version to see how the comic is made. And you can also ask questions there that I might answer here on a future video. Otherwise, if you've enjoyed what you see here, feel free to share and subscribe and all those other YouTube-isms. Take it easy.